it's wonderful to listen and know that as a successful startup founder who has got a backing of funds and everything, you're still expecting that things may not go in the right direction at some point in time, and you should always be ready to face the challenges that may come up from any corner in the life. You never know what will happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So taking that point, you then jump from your computer made easy to then you ended up moving to Silicon Valley, and then you became the go-to person in computers. So can you talk about that journey wherein you started playing around with your Commodore 64 and stuff like that?
Yeah, so that's also, I think, a pretty interesting story, and maybe emphasizes how like stubborn I am. So when I closed my computer stores, I had already lost a lot of money trying to keep these computer stores running, but I had sold them off or closed them down at the right time where I still had a little bit of money. So I had a few months worth of money. I was still living in Oregon at the time, and I started traveling to Silicon Valley, which is by car, it's about a 12-hour drive. By airplane, it's a 2-hour flight. So I just got this crazy idea when my computer stores failed that I wanted to get into doing electrical engineering. And I had, up to this point, I'd made some really cool circuit designs. I'd made some circuit boards that did some really interesting things. Some circuit boards you could plug into a monitor and it would generate video. I made sound generators that could play back audio or generate waveforms, and controllers where I could, take input, and made little tiny CPUs, all done in like these little FPGA chips. And I got this crazy idea that I could just bypass school and just go straight to Silicon Valley. And of course, I go to my father and friends and I ask them, like, my computer stores are failing, what should I do? And they're like, well, maybe this is the time you should go back to school, get a good job somewhere. And I just got stubborn. I'm like, no, I think I can do this. And I started going to Silicon Valley, and I started going to these various events. So these events for startups. And I would go and I would just meet people. And I'm like, hi, my name's Jeri. I'm an electrical engineer. I just, with confidence, like, I'm an electrical engineer. You want to see some of the things that I've done? And I had a little like messenger bag, and I pull out this circuit board and like, well, here's one, it drives an LCD. Here's another one, and it hook up to it. It does some audio stuff. And I would just show people like all these projects. And as I talked to all these various folks at different startups, they're like, come interview at our startup. You might be perfect for us. And so I started doing interviews. And so I made a resume and talked about race cars and computer stores and engineering race cars, and tried to put as much engineering in there as possible. And then I had like a list of all these various like FPGA projects I'd worked on. And I would go to the interviews, and the interviews would go terrible. It usually would be, I'd meet someone, they'd say, like, give us your resume. I'd either never hear back from them, or I'd get an interview and I couldn't make it through the interview process because, it would be revealed that I never went to school. But really there was this one moment that kind of broke everything open for me. And thank goodness it did, because at this point I had like almost run out of money, and I started a part-time job in Portland, Oregon, working minimum wage, which was, that's a totally another story. It was kind of funny. But I was just barely scraping by, barely had enough money to travel to Silicon Valley to do interviews. So I got this interview, or I met this person at a trade show. I was down there, I'd snuck into the trade show. I hadn't even paid for the trade show. So bending the rules, right? I could have got myself in trouble with the police probably. And I met this gentleman, and he's like, you're like the perfect person. You're so scrappy. Come talk to my team. Can you come back next week? And of course, it cost me all this money to go down there, but I had to say, like, yeah, I can come back next week. So I just like scrape as much money in 1 week's time so I could get back on a Greyhound bus and drive all the way back 12 hours to do this interview. I go in, I get dressed up really nice. I start the interview. They cut the interview off after one or two people. And I'm like very disappointed. I'm like walking down the stairs out of the building, and I met this founder of the startup. He's like, "Where are you going?" I'm like, "Well, they cut the interview off." And he's like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, I talked to so and so and so and so, and they just stopped the interview." And he's like, "Well, those aren't even the engineers." Like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Well, come with me." And so he took me back up the stairs, and he like grabbed a bunch of engineers and stuck us all in a conference room, and he just kind of did a group interview, and he just started asking me questions like, "We're going to do this. How would you do it?" And this and that and this and that. And at the end, they offered me a job. So it was my first engineering job. And what was amazing was how cheaply I did it. Um, I can't remember the exact amount of money, but it might have been somewhere between $12 and $15 an hour. But I was ecstatic to get a chance to do some engineering. If I remember right, the company was called Etherwire. It's been 20 plus years ago.
Wow.
And my task, they had this really cool chip that first responders could wear that would measure their heart rate, and it would transmit it back to like a mobile station. So like firefighters could, someone could watch them, make sure they're okay when they're going into a burning building. And I had to take their chip and interface it to a processor. And it was a lot of things that I'd never done before, but I was hell bent to do the best job I could and do a fantastic job. So I worked overtime. I just day and night, I got it done. And that was kind of my first like jumping off point. And then from there, when I left that company, moved to started interviewing at other companies, like those engineers are like, "She's great. She does a great job." And then I built up this reputation. And every job I went into, I was just hell bent to do the best I could. And then I started, since I was going from startup to startup, just doing one-off projects, I started to collect up people around me, engineers that would kind of follow me as well from project to project. That's kind of how I got this reputation of like, you need to build a
A
toy.
team. Yeah.
Yeah, like, okay, I know some people I can call. And so I'd call up friends like, "What are you doing?" "Oh, you have a little bit of few spare cycles on the weekend. Will you do this thing for me?" Um, and that's how like some of these toy designs came about. Like a company eventually contacted me in around 2004 that wanted to take the old Commodore 64 8-bit computer from the 1980s, and they wanted to shrink it down into a single chip and make a toy out of it. A toy that you could put some batteries in, plug it into your TV, and it had a built-in joystick, and you could play all your favorite games from 1984 or whatever. And so they contact me like, "Hey, can you do a custom chip for us?" Which I'd never done. I'd only done FPGAs before. And of course, this kind of bravado and confidence. I'm like, "Sure, no problem. I can do that." "Can you do it in 8 months?" I'm like, "Sure, no problem." And, I called up a bunch of mentors, people that worked in the chip industry, like, "Okay, I got to build a chip in 8 months. How do I do it?" You know, Called all my friends that could help me do the programming side of things and the circuit board side of things. And we got it done, in 8 months. We put this whole project together and made this toy, which ended up being like one of those toys that people, they're super collectible today. People love it. People remember me because of this toy. And it was like one of my earliest projects that, I had no freaking clue how I was going to build this complicated thing in 8 months, but we pulled it off.
Wow.
And I think this goes back to when I raced cars, everyone was kind of against me. No one took me serious. So I had to work extra hard. Like the girl building the race car, how could she be good, right? She's building her own car. She's not buying a race car. How could it be good? So I have to like learn a lot, work twice as hard, and then figure out how to make it a really good car. Same thing with the computer stores. I don't know how to sell a computer. I don't know how to make a Windows PC. So I've got to like in the evening time figure out how to build a Windows PC. During the daytime, I've got to figure out how to like sell and like work with customers and hire people and do all these scary things. Electronics, like, how do I take a hobby and like take it to that extra level of discipline where you can actually build 1 million toys? Like,
Ye-
it's, you just have to work 24 hours a day. Like, and that's how that project went. It's like during the day, like I'm working with the engineers, and during the night, I'm like teaching myself how to do chip design to try to stay ahead of like everything I had to do during that 8 months.
Great. So I like the way in which you put it across in terms of you take your hobby and put discipline into that, and then you convert it into a business model. So
Yeah.
that's a great way of putting it across, and it's like a uh, good go-to line for anyone who is who want to follow his passion or his
Hmm.
or her passion. That you might have a lot of hobbies which can get you money, but then you need to have that line of discipline put around that so that it moves in the right direction.
So I think there's something else that I learned along the way, and it kind of goes in parallel with the discipline. Um, Here in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of um, people that jump from company to company, and you can make an entire career going from company to company and not delivering on what you say you're going to do. And you can have some success for some amount of time doing that. I think somewhere along the line, I picked up this like um, sense of I don't know how to describe it. Like if I say I'm going to do something, I try to do what I say I'm going to do. And if I don't, I feel really bad about it. And I try to fix what happens, you know. And so that's kind of when I was getting my career going in electronics, like I would take on a project, and a lot of times you have to try to scope the project without even knowing how difficult it is. It's just like you have this high level concept, like we need to hook a processor to a radio chip. My first project, I had no clue. And um, I wanted to do a really good job. And there were other times in my career where I went in and they had a project and it was just way too complicated for like the time we had or my skill set, and either didn't work out right or it came out kind of poor. I felt bad about that, and I always tried to find a way to rectify and correct the situation. And I think that was like a good trait that I picked up along the way. I don't know exactly how I got it, but almost everything I do, I try to do my best. It doesn't always go right, but I always try to do the right thing. You know, when we get to my startup that didn't work out, I have some stories around that.
Oh yeah,
Um,
definitely.
yeah.
So before we get into the first startup that you had, we will. I would like to get into your stint with Valve. So I think after this, you ended up joining Valve, and you were the person who behind HTC Vive and all the cool stuff that we see around nowadays. So take us through that journey. Yeah.
Well, I'm proud to say that I was part of the team that eventually made the HTC Vive, but there were a lot of engineers working on that. So, but yeah, the Valve story is very interesting. So, I've always been a gamer. I always liked video games, but there was a period of time when I didn't play a lot of PC video games. I had been playing like an Xbox and PlayStation style video games, and I after my computer stores closed, I just didn't do as much PC gaming. So I was working various projects, and I also had started a YouTube channel a few years ago that I just demonstrate all of these various projects that I do in my garage, which is in my garage, I do very highly experimental electronics and optical things. And I document that and I just kind of share it with the world. So the folks at Valve Software, which is a big video game company who also distributes video games to gamers through their Steam store, that you can buy the games, reached out to me through social media, and they're like, hey, we've been trying to reach you. We don't know how to reach you. We have a job opportunity. So I wrote back to them like, sure, write to me here. Tell me about what you're doing. And so they write me, and they're like, we're this Valve company. We're a software company that does video games. We want to get into doing hardware. I didn't take them very serious. I'm like, a software company wanting to get into hardware. They can't be serious. I didn't make the connection that they were the company behind Steam. And so I kind of like, no, not interested. There's this hobby that I have where I collect pinball machines, like the ones with
Yeah,
steel
I've been
balls.
tracking
And
that. Yeah, yeah. Yes.
yeah. So I collect pinball machines as a hobby. And so there's these events you can go to where you can play pinball machines, and like the collectors bring their machines. So I was there, I'd brought some machines to this big event where there were hundreds and hundreds of people. And these folks from Valve Software show up, and they're like, hey, you're that Jeri person. We're from Valve. We really want to talk to you. I'm like, who are these Valve people? And then I think someone reached out to me on LinkedIn. I'm like, Valve, why are they bothering me so much? And then finally, Gabe Newell, the founder of the company, reaches out to me on social media. And he's like, hey, I want to come down and have lunch with you. I'm like, okay, I'll have lunch with you. That's fine. So at the time, I was living in Portland. And so he flew down from Washington to Portland, Oregon, and had lunch with me. And he like explained like, hey, Valve is a big thing. And here's the situation. We have a lot of money. Microsoft is trying to edge us out of the Windows platform with Windows 8. We need to make sure that we have other places we can sell games in the future. Like, oh, this sounds pretty serious. He's like, just come up to Washington in the next few days. It's not an interview. I just want you to meet the team. And so they bought me a ticket up to Seattle. I go to their facility. They take me around a little bit, buy me some coffee or give me some coffee. And they put me in a conference room. And then all of a sudden, all of these people come into the conference room. And it was totally a lie. It was an interview. They start very much like my first interview with this
Either
first
way.
startup. Yeah, Etherwire. They started asking me questions like, if we wanted to make a game controller, how would you do it? I'm like, oh, I'd go to this manufacturer. I would do this. I'd hire these people. And it was like easy questions for me to answer because I'd done all these toys and these other things. Like, I want to make a set-top box. Like, oh yeah, I've made set-top boxes. I helped TiVo make set-top boxes. And like this is how I do it. And, Gabe Newell gave like some kind of like, signal, and a bunch of people got up and left. And then Gabe Newell and a couple other people just started walking me around the skyscraper that Valve had their facility in. Gabe took me to the 4th floor of the building. He's like, this whole 4th floor could be yours, and you have an unlimited budget. You can hire anyone you want. The grand mission for you, if you were to accept this, is like, I want you to bring gamers to the living room. I want it to be everyone from grandma, grandpa, all the way down to the grandkids playing video games together on Steam. I don't care what it is. It could be a set-top box. It could be anything. And also a kind of funny thing, they're like, flew me up for one day or one afternoon up there, and I was scheduled to go back. He's like, don't go home. Just stay another day. Come and hang out with us for one more day. And I'm like, well, I didn't bring any clothing or toiletries. I'm just up here for the afternoon. He's like, don't worry, we'll figure it out. And so they took me to their swag room where they have t-shirts and stuff like that. They're like, well, here's some t-shirts. We'll drive you by a store if you want to buy some clothes, whatever, we'll buy you some clothes and some, toiletries and stuff like that. And that we got some toiletries. I'm like, well, okay, well, I'll buy some clothes. But the next day I showed up in a Valve Software shirt. I wasn't even hired at the time, nor 100% committed. And, of course, they spent the rest of the day walking me around and convincing me I should do it. really flattering. It was really fun. At the time I was working for another company and I had committed to a contract project. So it was like this certain duration project. And this kind of goes back to when I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it, right? So I had committed to this company. I had to get this project done, but Valve Software wanted me to come work with them immediately. And I'm like, well, Valve, I can work part-time with you because I have to finish this project with this other company. And they kept saying like, well, maybe we can just buy you out. Like how much, like, can we just give them money to get you 100% focused on the project? I'm like, no, when I say I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. And I worked overtime. I worked both jobs. I worked Valve and I worked this other contract. I got it done and completed. And then I started at Valve full time. It was pretty great. But we were given this mandate, like we had to bring the whole family together to play games. And what does that really mean? So I came up with this like idea, this kind of thesis of like the team that I had to put together. And so I thought to myself, it's like, okay, I need 1/3 researchers, people just doing fundamental science research on games and entertainment. I need 1/3 like people that can build things really fast, maybe kind of even like my skill set. And then I need like 1/3 like really good product people, people that know how to take a product from like concept all the way to manufacturing, which I also kind of straddle into that. And so that's what we started to do. We started building this like team of kind of those 3 different types of people and just put them all on the 4th floor of this skyscraper, um, which was so many fun stories of doing that. It was not a building that you should be doing hardware development in. So we're like trying to figure out how to get heavy machines on the 4th floor and, you know, get ventilation for like laser cutters and things like that. But we started all this fundamental research. So, yeah, as we got started, it was like no holds barred. We are going to look at everything. And since we have pretty much an unlimited budget, we went out and we just poured lots of money onto the problem to try things. Some of the things that a group of people went off and tested is they were trying to read the game player's emotions and take those emotions and put it back into the game. So we had people hooked up to electrodes. We had like cameras looking at your eyes to see where you're looking at and reading your emotional state and then putting that back into games. That was super cool project and research that was going on. Turns out, yeah, if you read people's emotions, you can make games more fun.
Yeah.
The problem is you got to put stuff all over people, which is really difficult to do.
And looks like there are people now doing serious work around that.
Yeah, and it's actually, that's a whole different discussion. Like ethically, how do we deal with reading people's emotions and some really bad things? And thanks to this research that I did back then, now I think about that a lot. It's like you can do really bad things if you start reading people's emotions and use it to manipulate them. So making a game more fun is kind of manipulation. Or if you're wearing augmented reality glasses that read your emotions, and you might be a company like Facebook that is all about manipulating people to look at advertisements. Like if you know what people like, you can easily manipulate them to do whatever you want. So some scary stuff coming in the future that we're going to have to think about carefully as a whole industry. Other stuff we did at Valve, which was really cool, we got into VR and AR experimentation. We got into game controllers, some really amazing stuff. You just like the new Index controller was actually prototyped when I was there. It just took them this long to finally like make that style of like button controller. I actually worked on some of those projects. It was really fun. On the VR and AR side, we just went out and purchased like these super expensive military headsets. And then we got these like medical tracking systems that doctors use to track scalpels and things like that. And we used that to prototype like, what would it be like if you made a VR headset that was perfect in every way? And, I like to say that all those experiments that we did there in AR and VR just through like military grade most expensive equipment. I got to see probably 20 years into the future, and it's really cool stuff that's coming. And so that's where I got hooked on mixed reality and augmented reality in particular. Because remember, I was given the mandate that I had to like bring the whole family together. And it was really obvious to me that if you're wearing augmented reality glasses and you can see your friends and family, and you have these video game interactions where you have holograms just spilling across the table, and you can just reach in and touch them and move things around. Anyone can play a game if you can reach in and touch things and move things, or use a magic wand that you can poke things, lift things. And so we prototyped all of that like 8, 9, 10 years ago. It's been a while. And I got to see that it's super, super fun to play games in AR.
Awesome. So I would, you want to step out?
Yeah, hold on a second. I just
Yeah,
want to see if I
yeah.
can
Yep,
control
yep.
the noise.
Oh, yeah. No worries.
Hey, can you pause on the noise? Sorry, there was just refrigerators and
Oh, no worries, no worries, no
things
worries.
banging, clanging.
Yeah, no worries. It's what do you call? You were the one of the few people in the industry who actually got to put together the real products in AR and VR. Because AR and VR, people have been talking about augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, and XR. Uh, this has been in news and in people's mind only in the last, let's say, 3 to 4 years, or maybe the last couple of years when people have been going all out and experimenting with these technologies. But it's good to know that you have been there right from the start, say 10 years back, and you have seen the way in which this can help the overall industry, not just one industry, but it has got a scope of scaling up and doing amazing things.
Yeah, I think that augmented reality or mixed reality, there's so many terms for it, is going to be so groundbreaking, and it's going to, if done right, and if we do if the industry does everything right, it's going to be a really positive thing in the world, and it's going to be a really amazing tool. And I feel so fortunate. I worked at Valve Software where we made these contraptions. They were so big, because we were strapping stuff together. It's like these giant things that we put on our head, but we could see like someday, like when we can make the really tiny glasses that are super thin and lightweight, this is what it's going to be like. It's going to, I was convinced super early on, like 10 years ago, that augmented reality is eventually going to replace our computers and our phones. And like, why are we going to have screens? We're going to have these glasses we can just pull out of our pockets, just like we pull a phone out and we slip the glasses on, and we can have the world's biggest screen. We can have, it can be digitizing things. I could like hold an object up, scan it in, and send that 3D model to my friends via my glasses. And instead of trying to like hold things up in front of a 2D screen and try to explain them, you could actually just hand them, a scanned model of it.
Great.
Yeah, it's great.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and when you were in Valve, when you were doing great things, again the police came knocking at your door, and then that's when you moved out of Valve and started the first real startup. I would say that, because you have, I would put all your racing and computer business and everything as a startup, early startups, but the real startup of Cast AR. So take us through that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, uh, as companies, companies that are big, there's always politics, right? And as our team grew and got quite large, there was all of this politics of what should we do? Should we do a VR headset? Should we do an augmented reality headset? Should we do like an Xbox or PlayStation? Just fighting inside the company. And I was like, we should be doing augmented reality. It's fits our mission better. We had people that were like, no, we should do VR because it's easier. Some people are doing like, we should do a set-top box because, We don't believe people will use VR or AR. And, a decision was made that they were going to go down the VR path and they weren't going to continue on the AR path. And so, folks that were associated with augmented reality projects just got cut from the company. But fortunately, the founder of the company, Gabe Newell, who hired me, I went to him and I said, I can't believe you're cutting the AR project. And in that meeting, I don't know what prompted me, but I said, you should just sell me that technology. And he's like, okay.
Wow.
And so that's how the startup began. It's like, I was mad. I was talking to Gabe Newell. I can't believe you did this. Well, actually, correction. I went through the full range of emotions talking to Gabe Newell. I'm like, first it started off, I was mad and firm. And then at one point I was like, I can't believe you're doing this. Like, it's such a good thing, to just at the spur of the moment, I'm like, towards the end, I'm like, you just should sell it to me. And that's when he said, okay. And
Wow.
yeah. And so in that instant, it was like, okay, well, I've seen people do startups before. How hard could it be?